All right, so we're at 1 minute past now, so let's kick off. So Bruce here from Squared Up, where today we're going to be looking at monitoring without authoring here at SCOMathon on our coffee break series. So thank you very much for joining. It's going to be a good show. This is one of those topics that has plagued SCOM for a long time because ultimately monitoring is the bread and butter of SCOM, and MP authoring is kind of difficult, even for the most seasoned SCOM professional. So this should be a good one. If we click on the slides, we'll get into the meat in a second. We need to first introduce today's panel. And of course, that starts with me. So I'm Bruce Cullen. I'm the Director of Engineering, one of them here at Squared Up. I'm also a founding member of Cookdown, and I'm a founding member of SCOMathon as well. And I have a guest with me today in the form of Keith Rochester. You are a monitoring consultant. Hello, how are you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Good. Great to have you with us. Would you like to introduce yourself, at least more professionally than I just did?
Yeah. So yeah, as you say, Keith Rochester. I've been working with SCOM, or MOM as it was now, for more years than I care to admit, really. I remember the days of MOM 2000 and the nightmare that was unsealed XML management packs. So yeah, I've been doing it for a while now, and yeah, over the last sort of few years, have come up with the idea for these management packs and have finally had a bit of time to put them together and build them out. And yeah, now it's time to talk about it.
Sounds good to me. It's a much needed solution that you've put together, and we're going to get into the detail in just a second. But before we kind of do that, I think it's good to set a few kind of ground rules, if you like, for what good monitoring even looks like. What is it that we mean when we talk about monitoring? So let's get into that first. And typically you'd have a bit of preamble from me, but today, more or less, I'm going to hand straight over to you, Keith, and let you steer the ship here.
Brilliant.
And I'll interject as needed.
Okay, so I like to put this slide up pretty much every time I talk about monitoring. It's good to remind us what it is that we're trying to achieve and not fall into the trap of monitoring for the sake of monitoring. Just because there's an MP out there doesn't mean that we actually need it. Because, okay, if we bring in the RIS management pack and it tells us that default website is down, and that's by design because all of our engineers switch off the default switch off the default website, but don't delete it or remove it. What good is that to us? So it's really important, I think, to have monitoring that is relevant to the people that are consuming it, not relevant to SCOM SMEs. We like to feed and water it, but actually, do we care? Probably not that much. We really just want to deliver the message to the right person at the right time. And it's dead easy to get into that trap of monitoring for the sake of monitoring. And one way of avoiding that trap is to hand over responsibility to our users so that they are then responsible for their monitoring and they can configure it, deploy it, do what they want. So rather than us having to fix an issue with a piece of monitoring because they've changed the application, they can do it themselves. And that means that the monitoring is more likely to be high quality and relevant to those people that actually want it. So to do that, we need to get people to build their own monitoring. And there are lots of great tools out there for deploying and building monitoring. We can do it through the SCOM console. There's loads of good templates in there, and they give you a lot of useful monitoring. You can do web applications, lots of the standard kind of stuff that you want, but you need to be a SCOM admin. So that's quite a privileged role within SCOM, because as we know, if you misconfigure SCOM, you're giving up the keys to the kingdom because it's out everywhere and it's running a system invariably. So I'm not so sure that I want to give all of the application owners the ability to go in there and author in the SCOM console. And I'm not sure that I want to teach them to do that anyway. They probably haven't got time to learn that.
For me, that's a big piece there. You know, it's not just about the power. Obviously, you can push an executable out to everywhere there is an agent and do a lot of damage. But like for the majority of people, they just don't really want to know how to author in SCOM. They don't need to, frankly, do they?
No. And yeah, why would they want to? It's a it's our product, isn't it? It's an ugly baby, and why would they want to learn about it? But there are some tools that make it a little bit easier. So Squared Up EAM, where we can do some very simple wizard-based monitoring that gets us URLs, TCP ports, some PowerShell scripts, dead easy to use, and yeah, it's an option out there. That was, I toyed with the idea of using that to help people build their own monitoring, but very quickly we ran up against some challenges of, we wanted to make it a little bit more complicated. We want to do this particular thing, and yeah, we can do that with a PowerShell script, but it's probably not the most efficient way to do that. So I shied away from that. MP Author from Silek, that's, yeah, it's wizard driven, it's very easy to use, but again, you've kind of got to have that SCOM person type hat on. You've got to understand about workflows and cook down and all this kind of stuff that just, it feels too heavy for an application owner to want to build their own monitoring. And then right at the top level, if you like, Visual Studio, you can do what you like, but there's no way on earth that that's a suitable tool for application owners to build their monitoring. So,
yeah, SCOM developer is absolutely the role for that, rather than the SCOM administrator. VSA is out of the hands of most, and again, there's a one common theme pretty much with all of these, with the possible exception arguably of Squared Up, is the SCOM knowledge, the SCOM experience. It's just you need to know how it works, you need to know why it does what it does to be successful with any of these tools. So I want to chuck on one extra tool to this list, which I toyed with sticking on the slide but decided against in the end, because it's kind of authoring adjacent, which is Cookdown's easy tune. Now, obviously, I'm from Cookdown, which is why I'm saying it, so some bias there. But it's all really about making it easy to tune your overrides, essentially. But again, requires knowledge of what an override is. It's all done from spreadsheets, and it will deal with the 80% case. But again, it requires knowledge of what overrides are.
And that's great if for all of the pre-canned OS stuff. It's phenomenal for giving people the power to look after and manage their overrides to the OS level monitoring. Because okay, you might be lucky and get a good standard across most of the environment, but there's going to be some team that wants something different, and giving them a spreadsheet to manage rather than getting them to go into the console and mess around with XML. It's a much better solution. Okay, so that's what we've got. But so what I wanted from this mythical tool that I wanted to create was to spend less time actually building the same management packs over and over again. And I've seen this as a common theme for the last 3 or 4 years, that people want the same stuff every time with a little bit of a tweak. And I've got quite an extensive library of MP fragments that, like Kevin, he's built his and made them public. I've got mine because they're not quite as tidy, and I've kept them in a OneNote. But it's still the same stuff, and I didn't get into IT to copy and paste for the rest of my life. So I wanted to avoid that, and I wanted to make monitoring useful for our end users, and that meant, as I said before, giving them the power to control it, the power for them to update it. And then I think this is probably the most important thing, is I wanted it to be consistent. I wanted, when someone talks about a Windows Service Monitor, it to mean the same everywhere. That we're monitoring this Windows service. We know that we've got a recovery to restart it if we want, so that when I integrate with a ticketing system, they can automatically request a service restart. And when you do an integration with third-party systems, a lot of the out-of-the-box management packs are similar, but then say, for example, the SQL management pack that Microsoft produced has a different base class, and it's not based on Windows Server. So just trying to get the Windows Server name from an alert from the SQL management pack is different to all of the other Microsoft management packs. And that just happens because it's such a great framework for building stuff that people will think, I'll just tweak it for my one, and they do, and then that just breaks my integration with ServiceNow, with whatever internal tools you want to do it with. So I wanted there to be a set of rules, and I wanted them to be my rules, effectively. So I built the standard monitoring framework, which with the idea that it's easy and quick to deploy business service focused monitoring, and that the configuration is stored outside of SCOM. I didn't want people having to go into the SCOM console to be able to make changes to that. I toyed with the idea of having that in JSON on a file share, but I just couldn't come up with a way of making that secure so that a rogue admin couldn't use it to elevate their permissions above what they've already got. Because as you said, SCOM is a powerful tool. It's running the system. If I were to say, I want to run this command that gives me access to that file share, we're away. And I mean, so I just ended up saying, okay, the registry on a local box is the most secure location I can find for that. And we're great at securing CSV files in Linux, putting them in a safe place and preventing people from administering those. So chose those two as the options there. But the big thing is we're storing that config outside of SCOM, and that's quite a useful selling thing for people, because a lot of people have got this perception that SCOM is end of life, where Microsoft have come out and said things like they don't use it internally themselves, which doesn't help people who are using SCOM and want to invest in creating monitoring with SCOM if they don't see there being a life for it. But if we say, actually, you're storing all of your configuration outside of SCOM, you can reuse that if you ever move to another platform far more easily than trying to export it from effective configuration reporting in SCOM. Those PowerShell commandlets are great, but if you ever try and move that into another monitoring tool, it's a horrendous process.
I think for me, there's also a piece in there about familiarity. You know, people know the Windows registry. It's been around since the dawn of Windows, basically. So, you know, there's no additional tool to learn, whether that tool be SCOM or something else, which is important to me.
Yeah, very true. So I built monitoring packs, and the idea was that it would be, we'd read in from the registry or the CSV files the information about what we want to monitor. So if we've got a Windows service, we'd read in the service name, the display name, the team that it belongs to, all the good stuff about that particular piece of monitoring that helps us route it through to the correct person and put it on the correct dashboards. That gets discovered, and that's it. All we need to do, set some keys, set some CSV files, the management packs read it in, and because it's our class model, is consistent, we know what it is that we're going to get, and assuming that I've not made too many mistakes in the code, it will be a consistent monitoring experience. So yeah, that's what I've built there. The last line there about a manual health state, it's more driven from Squared Up than anything else. If you've got a dashboard that's currently green, but all of the team are running around with their hair on fire because there's a problem, and it's just a case that we haven't actually monitored for that yet, setting that dashboard to be in a warning or a red state really helps with the perception that SCOM and Squared Up are actually doing the right job. And it just means that if you've got business stakeholders and they're looking at dashboards, it reflects the actual state of the environment. I feel it's something that's missing out of the box from a lot of stuff, is the ability to manually override health. We can reset it back to healthy, but setting it to critical warning we can't actually do.
We've had that as a feature request for Squared Up, the ability to manually override the health state of things, and EAs in Squared Up, for example, multiple times. It makes sense. At the end of the day, there are always going to be things that aren't going to be monitored out of the box.
Yeah, and so the way that I've built it so that you can make the health worse, but you can't ever make it better, because I didn't want to be able to hide things. So if you set the health to warning and it was already critical, well, critical continues to roll up. I'm sure it's possible to change that and set it to be healthy, but that feels a bit wrong in my eyes. But
I'd agree.
Okay, so right. With the standard management packs that I've built now, there's a lot of things that you can do just by setting registry keys, CSV files. We can monitor Windows services, schedule tasks. So scheduled tasks, we're looking at how long it's been since it's run, what the last run status was, how long it's been running for, the kind of things that you'd expect to be able to do on that. OLDB connections, we are confirming that we've got a connection in place, and then that we can track from a performance perspective how long that connection takes to do. But I think far more usefully is that we can run a query, and then based on the result of that query, generate a health state. So if it's between 0 and 10, we're good. If it goes above 10, we're unhealthy, and we set a critical health state, or whatever health state we've defined it to be. And that's I think that's a far more useful thing from a SQL perspective. We've got lots of databases out there, whether they're Microsoft SQL, Oracle, or whatever database language you like, that running a query gives us information about the health of a particular application, or gives us information that we want to put on a dashboard. So it could be the number of items in a queue. That's a useful thing to be able to track. We don't know what the threshold needs to be, but we'll collect that performance metric, store it in the database, and display it in squared up. That's a useful thing. For Windows folders and files, this is a count of the files and folders that are older than X, younger than Y, that kind of thing. It's the sort of thing that indicates that there's a build-up of stuff on disk that we want to take a look at. The Windows event logs, it's exactly the same thing as you get in the console. It's, have we got this event appearing? X event clears that once it's healthy. Do we have a repeating event occurring? Do we have a missing event? So those kind of stuff, and you just define what it is you need from there. Process monitoring, is the process running? Is there the expected number of process instances? Is its used memory within threshold? Is its used process CPU time within thresholds? The certificates we're looking at, are they due to expire soon? Have they expired? Do we trust the CA? That kind of stuff. And this is slightly different to the Microsoft PKI management pack, in that we just give it a URL to say, check the certificate on the endpoint over there, rather than you having to go into the certificate store and check from that perspective.
Cool. Simple.
Linux log file, yeah. Look for a value in a regular expression that appears in a log file. Dump out an alert when we see it. Reset it after X number of seconds. That sort of thing. Port check, yeah. Port check. How long is it taking to connect? Can we get a connection through to a port? The URLs are the same as the web availability tests if you built in the console. So can we open it? Is there expected content in the response body? Are we getting a status code? Is DNS resolvable? That sort of thing. We've got a simple ICMP ping. Sorry, I should say that the port and the ping, we can have the watcher node as either Linux or Windows on those. It don't care really what the OS is. We're firing out to the remote endpoint. But the two that I've highlighted in red there, the Windows command output and the Linux command output, these are your Swiss Army knife of monitoring, really. There's always some script that some application owner has created, and what you used to do is you bake that script into your management pack, or bake a path to that script into your management pack, and rely on them keeping it consistent so the output works if your management pack doesn't break. But the emphasis now is if they break it, well, they'll get an alert. It will go through to them. They'll instantly know, oh yes, it's because we've done a release of X, Y, and Z. We need to go and update the script or update the thresholds for those. Because we're running a system, or typically SCOM runs a system, that's quite high privilege. And I've moved all of the tasks to create any of the monitoring into separate management packs. So if you're not sure that you've got your health service locked down correctly, don't import those management packs, I'd suggest, because it means an operator can run a task and add in a Windows command output that gives them access to that box. And SCOM admins shouldn't be able to do that, really. I know that we can import management packs and do what we like, but we need to make sure that operators can't do that as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. Scary.
Yeah. Was it great power comes great responsibility?
It's pretty accurate. Yeah, well, it certainly sounds really cool. So I'm very excited to see the demo, to see what it looks like,
Okay.
and see how it was configured. Another thing to say while you're getting up the demo screen is if you have any comments or questions at any point, please do post them in the LinkedIn chat. I can bring them on screen and we can handle them as it makes sense, so throughout or in Q&A at the end. So please do comment.
Okay, cool. So we've imported management packs, and in my demo environment here, I've created a bunch of existing business services, and I just wanted to show you what that looks like complete, so that when we go through the steps of building a new one, we know what we're trying to aim for. And so if I open up the diagram view for this, just wait for the console to open, and I might zoom in a little bit there because that's
helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. I think everyone's seen groups appearing in diagram view there. We've got SCOM agents, that's the health service watcher. We've got some Windows OS objects that are appearing there. A principaler, so a Windows service that I'm monitoring with SMS. And as you can see, we've got configuration information about the monitoring as in properties of the object. I'll come back to that in a bit more detail. And then the same for our VM storage. It's a command executor. It's got properties, and we've got health rollup. If I just show the performance view there, because that was a command executor, we automatically have a rule that collects the output from that command and stores it as performance data. There you go. Instantly, we can put that into a squared up dashboard, and it shows us what's going on, why has it gone into an unhealthy state, etc. So in the old world, I would have built that management pack out, and like I said, I've got lots of fragments for creating relationships and creating dependency monitors and that kind of stuff. And I probably on a good day would have got that out in a couple of hours, and then I'd have gone through the change control process, and maybe in a week's time, someone gets some additional monitoring. It's nice, but I want to make it quicker, and I want to make it so that people can own it themselves. And to do that, we need to start creating registry keys and CSV files. And we can do that as SCOM operators, or we can do that as application SMEs. And the application SMEs will just be creating registry keys themselves, and we can give them example files. Or SCOM operators, we've got I'm not going to say a wizard, we can override a task to guide us through that process. So I'm going to get up my notes as to what I'm going to copy and paste in. And I'm on this Windows server. I'm going to add in using these tasks. As you can see, there's quite a few SMF related tasks to add in, various types of monitors, and take various actions. So I'm going to add a Windows service monitor, and we have to override that to set the various properties that we're going to fire into it. And there's quite a lot to take in there of what we could set. So I've done a reasonably decent job, I feel, of documenting that with the management packs on GitHub. So for example, on the Windows service monitor, I've said what the registry keys are. Here's an example key that we can use, but also what those key properties that we're going to be keying in are. So service name, what does check startup type mean? Because I never remember which way around that should be, whether it's true or false. Whether or not we're going to automatically restart the service. And if we do automatically restart it, how many times we're going to restart it before we give up and say, actually, well, we need a human involved in this. We shouldn't keep restarting this service indefinitely. So yeah, until you've gotten the grips to what those tasks are doing, the documentation is really useful for that. Some of the stuff, it's far more obvious what it should be, like business service. So that's the name of our service. And I suggest that you keep that consistent with your service management tool set. So if you're doing any kind of integration in the future, to have the same names makes it so much easier to tie them together. Yeah, environment, that's fairly obvious what we're doing there. The team, that's the service management team that are going to be responsible for this, and I set the alert owner to be that optionally. The component name, so on that diagram view that I had open, the component name is that sub group, if you like. So we've got business service, and then below that we have our component name. Common frequency, how often we want to run it, how many consecutive bad samples that we need to have before we generate an alert. So do we ignore the first one because this is a flaky service, or do we go on the first error condition? This block here, I think, is probably some of the most useful ones to have. It's around scheduling when the workflows actually run. So we don't need to put them into maintenance mode outside of these times. The workflows just don't run. And you can say, I want it to start at 9 o'clock in the morning or at midnight, and I want it to end at 7 o'clock in the evening. Whatever time frame you need it to run in, you set those properties and it's controlled there. And I couldn't find a better way to do this than to use a bit mask for the days of the week. I know that bit masks can be a little bit unwieldy and daunting for some people, but it's the best way to describe what days of the week do we want our monitoring to run on. So if we wanted it to run on Monday and Tuesday, we just set a value of 6 and we're away. And once people get that, it's just a case of adding up some numbers. Very quickly, people can control when they're running their monitoring. A description of what we want to include, and this is embedded into the alert body, so make it useful. Try and be as helpful to yourself in the future. Severity and priority, these are SCOM standard things, really. Do we want it to be a high priority critical, or do we want it to be a low priority warning, and that sort of thing? And then we can set documentation link that is, again, it's included in the alert, it's visible on the object, so we can drill out to it from squared up, that sort of thing. And then the last one there is the object team, and this is so that we can have the business service belongs to a particular team, and then this monitor or this object that we're monitoring belongs to another team. And typically this is if you've got a centralized hosting team, they'll get all of the storage alerts or the underlying stuff, and it needs to be included on the dashboard, but we don't want tickets or alerts going through to the team that looks after the application. So once you've got the gist of most of that, they're pretty common across all of the objects in the SMF world. So let's just go back to firing stuff into there. Service name, again, that's fairly obvious what we're doing, and I'm not very creative when it comes to giving things names. So principal is what I'm going to go with there. Team there, it's production. Send a link out to our environment.
While you paste those in, one thing to say about the ownership piece is that there's an added benefit to you as the SCOM administrator and owner, in that over time people move on, and this gives you clues to who the hell to go to when you're looking at some monitoring that someone set up, and who owns this is very important.
Yeah. Definitely, everyone's got those overrides that sit around forever that we're a little bit afraid to take out because why was that put in? Yeah. So, and I think it's key to route things to the correct team by having the owner on it. And lots of time you'll put in some kind of automation based on some configuration file or something to say these alerts go to this team. Well, this just shortcuts that process, that when the alerts gets generated, we know which team it's going to belong to because the properties of the object already exist. Okay, so we run our task, that goes off and creates the registry keys for there. We've got some output at the bottom of it, but it's not particularly interesting, other than that we can see that we've created some registry keys. and I'm going to actually go and look at those on the box, because as you say, it makes people are familiar with the registry, and it's easier to understand. Let me just refresh that. So under here, oh, look what I've done. I've typoed that. That would have created a monster business service that would have been ugly. There we go. We can fix that very, very quickly, and that's the same is true then for our end users. They've got visibility of it. They'll see in the dashboard suddenly they've got an unusual name. They can fix it themselves. So we've got, for our print spooler, the properties that we keyed in on that task, and discovery will kick in and start to build out our business service. I've got another pre-canned set of registry keys for an OLDB query, and as you can see, very, very similar properties in there. The ones that are different are the ones that you'd expect to be different. So this is the query that we're running to get a random number, what the timeout's going to be, what our expected minimum and maximum results are going to be, whether we need to monitor the result. So if we set that to be false, then we discover it still. We'd have an object in squared up and in SCOM, but we wouldn't actually change health state based on the monitor, which is useful if we've got stuff that we don't know yet what the thresholds need to be. So we can set to collect the query result, have it on a squared up dashboard, and say, actually, okay, there's our spike. That's when we had an issue. That's what we'll change it to be. And which row and which column of the result set to monitor for.
Makes sense.
And, we can use either a Windows authentication or basic authentication, and this is where not quite everything exists in the registry. I couldn't find a secure way of getting password credentials from the registry into SCOM to use as a runner's account. And I didn't want to just use them in a way that we could use a SCOM agent to decrypt them from the registry, because it felt like someone else would get them fairly easily as well. So if someone has created this and it does need to use a non-default account, then it's just a run as account profile change, and there's one for Windows and one for basic authentication, and we're away at that point. Okay, so I'm going to import that in as well. I'm just going to put that onto my SQL box. It saves me updating the registry, updating a runner's account for that. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. An end user can add in registry keys. We can help them create them using tasks or example registry keys, but very, very quickly, application owners know that when they add in a new piece of application, they add in some new monitoring to go alongside with it. The process for Linux-based or Unix-based stuff, very, very similar. We've got a bunch of tasks to add stuff in, and I'm going to add in a ping monitor. So again, it looks the same, and I've got some stuff to paste in. As I say, you can change things like severity and the priority, and that actually directly impacts dashboards as well. If you set it to be severity of critical, it's not just the alert that gets set to critical, as you would if you'd override the alert generation process. The actual health state is critical, or the health state is warning as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
I would like to fix somehow, but that's down to Microsoft, is the order that these appear, because they're in reverse alphabetical, and I can't change that. I can't change it by altering the modules that it's running underneath. It's reverse alphabetical, and that's what we've got.
Yeah, So much of this when you're authoring MPs, you have, especially anything where you're trying to add UI to the SCOM console, you're at the mercy of what you got.
Yeah. Right, so if I run that, and I've been sacrificing small children to the demo gods all morning, and so far it's working.
It's the main thing. It's always the thing. You can be forgiven for a live demo.
Yeah. So again, we've got an output of what's been written to that file, and from a end user perspective, within ECT, opt, SMF, SCOM discovery, these files get created, and the right actions that create those files use the privileged run as profile. So as long as you're configuring that correctly, the permissions to add monitoring is separate from the permissions actually needed by the monitoring itself to run. So as long as you're configuring your run as accounts correctly, that should be pretty secure. Yeah, I've put together some guidance around how you should be doing that as well. And if we look at that ping file, it's a CSV file, dead easy to understand what we're adding in there, and off we go. Typically, whether you're using Satellite, Ansible, whatever you're using to do your deployments for your applications, deploying a CSV file or registry keys alongside that works pretty well. Okay, so I've overridden the discoveries so that they run a little bit more quickly, and there we go. We've got our coffee break demo appearing now.
It was much quicker than normal.
So, but I'm impatient. We've only got the Windows stuff through there. We've got a task over here to trigger the discoveries, and that'll go and force the SMF discoveries to run at this moment in time. Just, it's purely a patience thing on my behalf there.
It also helps massively with demos. I've taken into either something similar or just editing it and pre-recording it and editing out the 15+ minutes we have to wait for SCOM to do its thing.
Yeah. So that should be appearing. Should be appearing at all there. We've upset SCOM by being impatient. There we go. So we can see it appearing now, and health will start to roll up shortly. So that's adding new monitoring in, but there's always going to be monitoring that we already have that's great, that we want to include in our dashboards or in our business service and have those alerts routed to the relevant team by setting the owner of those. And I've done this in two different ways. For stuff that commonly gets asked to be added in, I've created tasks to do it from that particular class. If we go to SQL Server databases, we can add in this database to our business service, and the override to do that is far simpler. And because we know what it is that we're targeting, we can pull in the instance name, etc., from the object that already exists. So I'll just paste in that stuff again.
Do you keep those questions coming in if you have them? I'll put them on screen towards the end. I haven't forgotten they're there, don't worry.
Cool. So adding in a pre-existing object that I've already created tasks for is very straightforward. So we run the wizard, and in the registry, it looks nice and simple. So under our coffee break, we've got SQL DB, the name of the DB, the component that we're going to put it into, and the instance name. All kind of stuff that people should know about their databases and should be easy to do. But there's going to be things that I don't know about yet, and So I've created the idea of being able to add a generic object to a business service, and this is any class instance in SCOM. We can add it in, and I want to add in this D drive. It's important to our business service. So we have this SMF task to add a generic object for the currently selected object in there. And as before, it's fairly simple what's going on. We're giving it a team. This is the object team. So in this case, because it's storage, it goes through to hosting as opposed to the application team that we're using. One field that I'm not filling in here at the moment is the management server. The way that this works is it gets a session to a management server, works out whether this is an object that exists on a Linux or a Windows box, and then uses the underlying tasks to drive the creation of that CSV file or the registry keys. And the only way I can do that is from a management server. By default, this is targeted at the collection server, so whichever server the object is reporting to, and you shouldn't need to change it. I exposed it during testing, and I thought that's the sort of thing that I might need to use again in the future when something funky is happening in an environment. So that's why it's there, but we can leave it as it is. So that's going off. Takes a little bit longer. It's working out what it is and where to write the registry keys or CSV file, but that should have then written to my SQL server a generic object registry key, and this is where it's slightly more complicated. We need an object ID to do that. And
makes sense. Yeah, of course. Yep.
And the way that I suggest people get their object IDs, I mean, the easiest way is squared up, isn't it? There it is in the address bar. That's your object ID. If you can't find what you need to include in your registry keys using squared up to search for it, we're losing that battle, aren't we? Really. So
that is fair. The other thing I guess obviously see this being really useful for is all those custom classes. You know, if anyone has ever done custom authoring, you know, for something that's business critical and it's really important to them, then yeah, there's going to clearly be a custom class.
Yeah, and grabbing it by the ID was the only way I could do that to work consistently, because we don't have access to the SDK from the agents to be able to pull in display strings and that kind of stuff. So the way that works on a technical perspective, it's a two-stage discovery. The first stage is discover a generic object seed, and hopefully, yeah, there we go. It's been discovered, and I store there where it's come from. So you could put in a registry key saying I wanted to include the health of this disk, but put it onto a different server, or this custom class, but put it onto your management server, or whatever. You specify where you want to store these generic objects. So first stage is to discover where it is, what the ID is, and where it sits. And then I've got a second discovery phase that's hopefully by now kicking in, that goes and creates the relationships with our business service and everything like that. And there we go. It's coming and saying it's been successful. Nice. If it, for whatever reason, it was unsuccessful, and the kind of things that I've put as I think are unsuccessful discovery processes is if it's missing, or if we've tried to nest an object within the business service itself. I mean, there's nothing to stop you from doing that. You can put groups within groups and then nest them, but that feels like it's going to be a horrible thing to see in the GUI, and I'm going to stop you from doing it if I can.
Sounds like a reasonable response to me. Circular responses and whatnot, circular relationships.
Yeah. And so if someone has gone in and keyed that incorrectly, we'll generate an alert, and we know which team to route that through to. So we will set the owner for that team at that point. Right. So I'm just going to go back to our business services again, and that should all be in there now. Yep. So everything that we've built in is there, and even with me talking through it and copying and pasting in, it's not been a particularly long process, and I don't think there was anything overly complicated that our application owners, application devs would have to deal with there. It's all kind of application-y as opposed to SCOM-y, and with the exception of the SCOM IDs, all stuff that they should know about their applications. The bit that I wanted to demo here before I go into Squared Up is, so this is a business service component, and we've got a task to set the component health state, or we can do it at the top level, set the business service state. And I'm going to set the storage state, and we get to optionally include a message, but I encourage people to put something of use in there, because it gets included in the alert body, which then, if you're doing any kind of auto ticketing, gets included in your tickets. It's better, isn't it, to have useful information as opposed to the default message. So we'll run that. From a technical perspective, this is creating SDK events. So it works very much like the orchestrator integration pack to create health state, and that takes a little while in my lab because I've only got one management server, and I really need to convince my Mrs. Rochester to allow us to get more kit, but not that we haven't got funding for that approved as yet. So that will take a couple of minutes, and the health state will change. Now, as I said previously, the big driver for this is I want a consistent look and feel, and I want to consistently be able to consume that information in the same way, so that when a new user comes in, they understand very easily this is what monitoring looks like. It doesn't matter which team I'm in, monitoring looks the same. Doesn't matter what application I'm looking at, it looks the same. So in Squared Up, this is where perspectives rule the day for us. I've got two dashboards, a business services dashboard and a teams dashboard, and the teams shows all of the teams that have been created, and we can go into a team and see what business services it belong to that team. So if we look at the monitoring team, we've got two business services in there, a SCOM and a Squared Up, and this view is just a perspective. So if we needed to amend it, we amend it for all teams, and that gets updated. I'm going to go back to the main dashboards, and if we look at the trading desk demo one, there's a bit more of information on that for us. And this is what every business service that I monitor and that Squared Up shows. They get this look and feel to it, and it's the business service components, key information around it, the team that it belongs to, so you can drill across to the team and see what other business services are there, a heat map for the alerts, and as I say, this is a perspective as opposed to a dashboard. So change it once, changes everywhere. If you wanted to do what I've done for a lot of people is created a service desk perspective that hooks into their service management tool, and then using the business service or the team pulls back tickets that are relevant to that team or business service. And you've got those properties there, so using the Squared Up picker, it's dead easy to include that in your script or in your query or however you're pulling that information in. You don't have to then have a bunch of hard-coded variables. It's pulled in from that directly from Squared Up.
Very nice. Yes. Bonus points for use of the new heat map tile in 5.9.
Thank you. And for the demo, I changed it because the default was blue. And when I started clicking around, I thought that needs to be red, but I'll put it back to be blue for the moment. And if we go to another one, they're all blue already. So it's really hammering home that one set adjacent to maintain. We're not going to have to do a lot of Squared Up dashboard authoring. Dead easy as it is, The less work I can do, the better, really. And I'm going to drill into, what am I going to drill into? The trades business service component. And this is the default perspective that appears. So it looks very similar to the team one, gives us the properties of the component, pulls back any alerts, what components are within there. But because I know that it's got OLDB components, I add in the OLDB components perspective, and that shows me the performance information and the health state of those individual OLDBs. So you can obviously mix and match what you put into a business service component. You could have OLDBs, Windows command executors, Windows services, whatever you like, however you want to logically group it, and those perspectives would appear as the objects are there. So it makes it really easy to get down to performance information for our OLDB queries that we've got there. The last bit I just want to drill into this, and so this is the SMF object perspective, and it's all of the key stuff that you need to know about the monitoring that's there. So what monitors have been enabled, the frequency, the alert properties, any performance metrics that have come back. That means that, okay, I might not have been the person that set the registry keys, but I can certainly go and look and see what those registry keys have been set to, and I can raise a query saying, I'm the application owner, I think that we need to change the threshold or when this runs, and I can speak to my application SME as opposed to speaking to the SCOM people to get this addressed. And wherever possible, I've set it to, we can drill back up to either a business service or a team to give us that information.
Yeah, very nice. And that way, if there are any disputes as to what the correct level for something is, ultimately it's owned by the application owner, who is probably the best placed person to make that call rather than the SCOM admin, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So just before we go to finish on the recap, I just want to, if I look at one of the rail servers, break perspectives at OS level that show what's configured on this actual box. So very quickly I can say on my one rail box, these are all the things that are monitored. This is some key properties from the CSV files on those boxes, along with the path for it. So it prompts people to go and make the changes that they need to. And then I've done the same on Windows boxes. So we were doing it on SQL 1. And there we go. We can see registry keys, what they've been set to, and the values and what's been monitored on there. Right.
Very nice. Nice.
And when that's all set up correctly, what should happen is when alerts are generated, the owner is set based on the property, and that's a rule that runs every 5 minutes and picks up configurable on the rule, so you can override this the last X number of alerts in the last time frame. So you can say ignore it for 10 minutes in case you've got another process that's doing your alert routing, and we don't want to conflict with that. But what I'll do is, if it's an SMF object like this imaginary Manchester ping, it gets set based on the object property. So the property there, the team is networks. It's been set to networks. We can see in the history that it's been set by that particular rule. Go and do it. For this SQL, this is clearly, it's not SMF based monitoring. This is out of the SQL management pack. I've gone and updated it based on it being a member of a business service that has a team that's set to be, what do we say, WS support. And if for some reason you decided to include that SQL instance in multiple business services, this would be a comma separated list of teams that you've got there. So you can still then route through to the correct teams.
Very nice. Super useful. Yeah.
Okay. So to recap, we've got tasks that create monitoring, or you can do it via the registry key. Those tasks are in a single management or single management pack for Windows, single management pack for Linux. So if you're not comfortable that you've locked down your operators sufficiently, don't import those. Just use the registry keys manually. Yeah. Any questions?
Right, before we go to questions, there are a good old few, not all related. I'm just going to quickly finish off by just setting you some homework there, some next steps. So if you like what you've seen today and you think this could be super useful, personally, it looks super useful to me, then your next steps are to go and get Keith's standard monitoring framework management pack. I'm just going to hit post on LinkedIn to the links. You haven't got to wait for slides or whatnot. So it's on GitHub, so of course it's free. Also, it means that is the ultimate place, a great place to put feedback and to put comments. And if you want to make changes, again, it's GitHub. You can branch, you can contribute, and you can PR back in. And along with the sample dashboards and perspectives, they're there too. So anything else you wanted to add, Keith, before we move on to Q&A?
No, that's it. Thanks.
All right. So in which case then, Q&A time is now. So there are a good few, not all of which are directly relevant. The first question was, how do you add an agent in the SCOM console without using PowerShell, which has been nicely handled in the chat. So the next one to bring on is going to be this one, which is actually from Ash from Arup. Quickly, if I now bring it up on screen. It's around max service restarts and the behavior there. Essentially, I'll give you a minute to read it, Keith. You may not have had a chance, but the gist is, by default, the recovery option will restart 3 times. Why is there a need to add additional restarts and to specify that limit? I'll let you answer, but there's also an answer from Kevin Holman, who's clearly also watching us in the chat. So I'll give you a minute to read it and answer it before I put Kevin's answer up.
Yes, it should be handled by the OS. And most of the time it is. It's so many times though I've been asked to have SCOM restart it because we've got a situation where a back-end system is offline. The OS has cycled it 3 times, then the back-end system comes back online, and finally we're able to start it, but the OS has given up at that point. It's in the ideal world you wouldn't need to do it, but unfortunately we don't live in that world yet.
Yeah, I think that's fair. In case you're interested, this is Kevin Holman's answer, which is also obviously on LinkedIn, so I've got it from. I'll give you a second to take this in.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty much spot on. Let me see what other questions there are. Lots and lots of chat relating to the solution and relating to installing the agent via PowerShell. I can't see any more questions on the solution. Let me just check. I can't see anything else, so I'll just give it another minute or two to see if there's any questions. Well, a couple of seconds rather than a minute or two, and just give another plug for where the link is. You can get this solution from. So SMF is on GitHub here. So github.com/Keith Rochester /standard-monitoring-framework. It's all there. Let's see if there's any final questions. There don't appear to be. So all that's left to do is stunned silence indeed. Possibly a good thing, usually a good thing. So all that's left to do is to say thank you. Thank you, Keith, for being willing to present your awesome solution. It's great to see initiative and effort being put into SCOM and into intuitive solutions that solve real problems. As I'm sure I said on LinkedIn at some point, we almost built something identical under Cookdown. We were going to sell it, and so it's good to see the idea come to life entirely independently. And of course, thank you to you for watching wherever you are. If there are questions that come to mind after today's webinar, LinkedIn is forever, so you can always put them in the LinkedIn chat of the event, and I'm sure Keith will get back to you. So thank you very much, everyone. Until next time we're together, thanks very much. Goodbye.